Welcome to Jeremy's IT Lab. This is a free, complete course for the CCNA. If you like these videos, please subscribe to follow along with the series. Also, please like and leave a comment, and share the video to help spread this free series of videos. Thanks for your help. In this video, we will cover security fundamentals. The CCNA is not a cybersecurity certification, but it requires candidates to learn some fundamentals of network and system security necessary to work as an IT professional. Here are the exam topics we'll cover in this video. We'll define some key security concepts, security program elements, talk about passwords and user authentication, and define the AAA concepts of authentication, authorization, and accounting. That seems like a lot for one video, and it is. This video will be a brief introduction to a lot of different security topics. If you haven't studied this material before, there will be a lot of new terms to learn and memorize. So I recommend taking notes to keep all of the information organized. Here's what we'll cover in specific. First, I'll introduce some key security concepts and terms. Then some common attacks which can target an enterprise's systems and information. Then I'll talk about passwords and multi-factor authentication. Then the concepts of authentication, authorization, and accounting, also known as AAA. Finally, I'll introduce security programs, which should be implemented by enterprises to secure their systems and educate their staff. Watch until the end of the video for a bonus question from Boson Software's ExSim for CCNA. So, the title of this slide is Why Security? What is the purpose or goal of security in an enterprise? I'm sure you can think of some reasons why an enterprise would want its information and systems to be secure, but it's good to have a framework. The principles of the CIA Triad form the foundation of security. We're not talking about the American Central Intelligence Agency. Here's what CIA stands for in this case. C stands for confidentiality. What does that mean? It means that only authorized users should be able to access data. Some information and data is public and can be accessed by anyone. For example, information put on the company website. But some is secret and should only be accessed by specific people. And there are degrees in the middle. Some information is more secret, some is less secret. Then, I stands for integrity. This means that data should not be tampered with, should not be modified by unauthorized users. Data should be correct and authentic, not modified by an attacker. Finally, A stands for availability. This means that the enterprise network and systems should be operational and accessible to authorized users. For example, staff should be able to access the internal resources they need to perform their duties, and the company's website should be up and running and available to customers. So that's the CIA Triad: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Attackers can threaten the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of an enterprise's systems and information. We'll see how attackers do that when we look at some common attacks. In addition to the CIA Triad, there are some fundamental security concepts you should understand, and these are explicitly stated in the exam topics. First, a vulnerability is any potential weakness that can compromise the CIA of a system or information. But keep in mind, a potential weakness on its own isn't a problem. The windows of a house, for example, are vulnerabilities, potential weaknesses, but houses continue to have windows. Next, an exploit is something that can potentially be used to exploit the vulnerability. But again, something that can potentially be used as an exploit isn't a problem on its own. A rock can exploit the weakness of a window and be used to enter a house, but rocks aren't problems on their own. Next, a threat is the potential of a vulnerability to be exploited. This ties it all together. To use the window and rock analogy, a threat is a robber who wants to use a rock to break a window and enter your house. Here's a more relevant example. A hacker exploiting a vulnerability in your system is a threat. Finally, a mitigation technique is something that can protect against threats. There are various mitigation techniques, and they depend on the threat that is being defended against, and we'll cover some techniques in this video and the next few videos on security. Appropriate mitigation techniques should be implemented everywhere a vulnerability can be exploited, for example, client devices, servers, switches, routers, firewalls. In addition, mitigation techniques include things like preventing unauthorized people from getting physical access to the devices by keeping them in a secure rack, behind a secure door, etc. But always remember, no system is perfectly secure. Systems can be more secure or less secure, but there are no guarantees in security. You can, for example, implement malware detection on your network firewall and have the best antivirus software on client PCs, but the chance of the PCs getting infected with malware is never zero. Now let's review some common attacks. These are threats which can potentially exploit vulnerabilities to compromise the confidentiality, integrity, or availability, CIA, of an enterprise's systems and information. These are the kinds of attacks we will look at. There are many more potential attacks than just these, but these are some of the main attack categories. Let's take a brief look at each one individually. The first attack is the denial of service, DOS attack. DOS attacks threaten the availability of a system, the A of the CIA Triad. There are many kinds, and I'll show a few of them, but one common DOS attack is the TCP SYN flood, which exploits the TCP three-way handshake. As you know, the TCP three-way handshake is SYN, SYN-ACK, and ACK. In a TCP SYN flood, the attacker sends countless TCP SYN messages to the target. The target sends a SYN-ACK message in response to each SYN it receives. But the attacker never replies with the final ACK of the handshake. This final ACK is never sent. The target waits for the final ACK of each handshake, and the incomplete connections fill up the target's TCP connection table. The incomplete connections will time out and be removed from the table after a certain period of time, but the attacker continues sending SYN messages to fill up the table. In the end, the target is no longer able to make legitimate TCP connections because it has reached the maximum number of TCP connections it can maintain. Let me demonstrate with a diagram. For each SYN message the attacker sends, the target puts an entry in its TCP connection table and sends a SYN-ACK message, then waits for an ACK to complete the connection. But the ACK never comes. The attacker keeps sending SYN messages, and the target keeps sending SYN-ACK messages. Then the target's TCP connection table fills up, and the denial of service has been achieved. By the way, why do you think I drew the SYN-ACK arrows not reaching the attacker? It's because the attacker likely spoofs their IP address, meaning they use a fake IP address, so the SYN-ACK messages don't return back to them. I'll talk about spoof attacks after DOS attacks. However, a denial of service like that is usually not done by a single attacker. A much more powerful kind of attack is the DDoS. In a DDoS, distributed denial of service attack, the attacker infects many target computers with malware and uses them all to initiate a denial of service attack, for example, a TCP SYN flood attack. This group of infected computers is called a botnet. So, in this example, the attacker could, through separate attacks, infect these PCs with malware. Then, altogether, they start flooding the target with TCP SYN messages, so the target server is no longer able to respond to legitimate TCP connection requests. So, to summarize denial of service attacks, they attack the availability of a system, the A of the CIA Triad. Next, let's look at spoofing attacks. To spoof an address is to use a fake source address, for example, a fake IP or MAC address. There are numerous attacks that involve spoofing. It's not a single kind of attack. An example of a spoofing attack is a DHCP exhaustion attack. Actually, it's similar to the TCP SYN flood attack. An attacker uses spoofed MAC addresses to flood DHCP discover messages. Then, the target server's DHCP pool becomes full, resulting in a denial of service to other devices. They won't be able to get an IP address. Note that spoofing attacks don't have to be denial of service attacks, but this type is. Let me demonstrate. The attacker sends a DHCP discover message with a fake source MAC address. Then it sends another with a different fake source MAC address. Then it does it again with another fake source MAC address. It keeps sending these at a very quick pace. The server will reply to each discover with a DHCP offer message, and while it is offering an IP address, it will not assign that address to other devices. So, if these PCs send DHCP discover messages to get IP addresses, the server is not able to give them their IP addresses because its DHCP pool is full. Maybe it had 250 IP addresses to lease to clients, but they are all taken by the attacker. So, that's just one example of a spoofing attack. And in the previous TCP SYN flood example, source IP addresses were spoofed too, so actually, it's also a spoofing attack. And this DHCP exhaustion attack resulted in a denial of service, so it's a DOS attack too. As you can see, some of these attack types are connected and related. They aren't totally separate. But once again, we are attacking the availability, the A of the CIA triad. Note that not all spoofing attacks are DOS attacks. Later I'll show another type of spoofing attack that targets the confidentiality and integrity of a system, not the availability. Next, let's look at reflection and amplification attacks. In a reflection attack, the attacker sends traffic to what's called a reflector, and spoofs the source address of its packets using the target's IP address. Then the reflector, for example a DNS server, sends the reply to the target's IP address. So what's the purpose of this attack? Well, if the amount of traffic is large enough, this can result in a denial of service to the target. But there is a more powerful form of reflection attack called an amplification attack. A reflection attack becomes an amplification attack when the amount of traffic sent by the attacker is small, but it triggers a large amount of traffic to be sent from the reflector to the target. This is how it can trigger a denial of service. Let me demonstrate again. The attacker's IP address is 1.2.3.4, but it uses source IP address 5.6.7.8 to send a message to a server at 8.8.8.8, which becomes the reflector. 5.6.7.8 is the IP address of the target of the attack. The attacker's message causes the reflector to send a large amount of traffic to the target, resulting in a denial of service. For example, there are DNS and NTP vulnerabilities which can be exploited for amplification attacks like this. You can check out these Cloudflare articles to read about them. Do a Google search for DNS amplification attack or NTP amplification attack, and you'll find these articles. The next type of attack is the man-in-the-middle attack. In this kind of attack, the attacker places himself between the source and destination to eavesdrop on communications or to modify traffic before it reaches the destination. A common example is ARP spoofing, also known as ARP poisoning. So this is yet another kind of spoofing attack. In an ARP spoofing attack, a host sends an ARP request asking for the MAC address of another device. In this case, PC1 is asking for the MAC address of 10.0.0.1, which is server 1. Because ARP request messages are broadcast, the switch floods the frame, so both server 1 and the attacker receive it. Then the target of the ARP request, server 1 in this case, sends an ARP reply to inform the requester, PC1, of server 1's MAC address. But here's the attack. The attacker waits briefly, and then sends another ARP reply after the legitimate replier. So what's the effect of this? If the attacker's ARP reply arrives last, it will overwrite the legitimate ARP entry in PC1's ARP table. So, what happens next? Well, now in PC1's ARP table, the entry for 10.0.0.1 will have the attacker's MAC address, not the address of the real 10.0.0.1, which is server 1. So when PC1 tries to send traffic to server 1, it will be forwarded to the attacker instead. Then the attacker can inspect the messages, read their contents, and then forward them on to server 1. Or another possibility is that the attacker can also modify the messages before forwarding them to server 1. So in this example, the threat isn't to the availability of the CIA triad. This kind of attack compromises the confidentiality and integrity, the C and I of the CIA triad, of the communications between PC1 and server 1. It compromises the confidentiality because an unauthorized user, the attacker, has access to the communications between PC1 and server 1. and it compromises the integrity because that unauthorized user can also modify the data before it reaches the destination. Next, let's look at reconnaissance attacks. These attacks aren't attacks themselves, but they are used to gather information about a target, which can be used for a future attack. This is often publicly available information, which is why it's not really an attack itself. The information isn't actually confidential. For example, you can perform an NS lookup to learn the IP address of a site. From there, you can probe for open ports, which are potential vulnerabilities. You could also perform a whois query to learn email addresses, phone numbers, physical addresses, etc. You can perform a whois query at this website here. For example, I did a lookup of my own website. Once contact information is known, some of the so-called social engineering attacks, which we'll look at soon, can be carried out to threaten the target enterprise. Next up is malware, something you've probably heard of. Malware, which means malicious software, refers to a variety of harmful programs that can infect a computer. Here are a few types. Viruses are malware that infects other software, called a host program. The virus spreads as the software is shared by users or downloaded from malicious websites, etc. Once the virus has infected the device, it can do various harmful things, such as corrupting or modifying files on the target computer. Then there are worms, which are different than viruses in that they don't require a host program. They are standalone malware and are also able to spread on their own without user interaction. The spread of worms from device to device can congest the network, but in addition to that, if the worm has a payload, other malicious code within the worm, it can cause additional harm to target devices. Another famous kind of malware is the Trojan horse, which is harmful software disguised as legitimate software. Trojan horses spread through user interaction, such as opening email attachments or downloading a file from the internet. Note that these types of malware are defined mostly by how the malware infects a system and how it spreads, not the attacks they carry out after infecting the system. The above malware types can exploit various vulnerabilities to threaten any of the CIA triad of the target device. And as I said before, there are many types of malware. These three are just a few large categories of malware. Next up is a very dangerous category of attack: social engineering. Social engineering attacks target the most vulnerable part of any system, the people. This is something you have to be aware of when designing a security policy. No matter how many security features you configure on your routers, switches, firewalls, servers, PCs, etc., people are always a vulnerability that can be exploited. Social engineering attacks involve psychological manipulation to make the target reveal confidential information or perform some action the attacker tells the target to do. As with the previous attack types, there are various kinds of social engineering attacks. Here are a few common ones. Phishing involves fraudulent emails that appear to come from a legitimate business, maybe Amazon, your bank, or your credit card company, for example. These emails contain links to a fraudulent website that seems legitimate. For example, the website may look identical to the real login page of your bank's website. Users are told to log in to the fraudulent website, therefore providing their login credentials to the attacker. Spear phishing is a type of phishing that is more targeted, not mass emails sent out to anybody, but perhaps emails sent to employees of a specific company, for example. Whaling is another kind of phishing, targeted at high-profile individuals, for example, a company president. There is also vishing, voice phishing, which is phishing performed over the phone. The attacker could pretend to be from the target's bank, or maybe another department in the company. They might say something like, "Hi, this is Jeremy from the IT department. Due to company policy, we need to reset your password. Could you tell me the password you're currently using and I'll reset it for you?" Now, I'm sure a real attacker would be more convincing than that, but that's just an example. Another kind is smishing, SMS phishing, which is phishing performed using SMS text messages to the target's cell phone. Okay, let's move on from phishing, because there are other kinds of social engineering attacks. Watering hole attacks compromise sites that the target victim frequently visits. If a malicious link is placed on a website the target trusts, they might not hesitate to click it. So this kind of attack is taking advantage of the user's trust in the website they frequently visit. They don't think twice about clicking the link. Okay, I want to mention one more kind of social engineering. Tailgating attacks involve entering restricted, secure areas by simply walking in behind an authorized person as they enter. Any company that has restricted areas will have rules against this, but often, the target will hold the door open for the attacker to be polite, assuming the attacker is also authorized to enter. To summarize social engineering attacks, they are attacks that don't directly exploit a company's IT systems. Instead, they exploit the employees. Here's an example of a phishing email. It says that the target's Amazon account has been locked due to a suspicious login, and there is a link at the bottom requesting that the target verify their account information. If the target clicks on that link and enters their login information, the attacker now has access to their Amazon account. Anyone who has an email address has seen emails like this, I'm sure. It's something we all have to watch out for. Okay, the final kind of attack we'll look at are password-related attacks. Most systems use a username and password combination to authenticate users. The username itself is often simple and easy to guess. For example, the user's email address. So the strength and secrecy of the password is relied on to provide the necessary security. However, attackers can learn a user's password through multiple methods. First of all, they could simply guess the password. Now, successfully guessing a password should be extremely rare, but it is a possibility. A dictionary attack can also be used, in which a program runs through a dictionary, which is a list of common words and passwords, to guess the target's password. It tries each one, hoping to find the correct password. A brute force attack involves trying every possible combination of letters, numbers, and special characters to find the target's password. This requires a very powerful computer, and if the password is sufficiently strong, the chances of it working are very low, because it takes so much time. So what makes a password strong, so that it can't easily be brute forced? Well, strong passwords should contain at least 8 characters. Definitely not less, but preferably more than 8. The more characters, the harder it is to brute force attack the password. A strong password should have a mix of uppercase and lowercase letters, and a mix of letters and numbers. Also, it should have 1 or more special characters, such as question marks, exclamation points, etc. Finally, it should be changed regularly. Most enterprises will enforce rules like these on their employees, but it's also recommended that you follow rules like these when making your own personal passwords. Okay, that was a lot of potential attacks. To help you review, here's a basic summary of each attack. If you want to know more about each kind of attack, a Google search will give you all kinds of great resources. For our purposes, just a basic understanding of each attack type is sufficient for now. So, make sure you know these basic attack types. Next, let's continue with the topic of multi-factor authentication. No matter how secure the password, there is still a chance it gets into the hands of an attacker. That's why multi-factor authentication is becoming more and more widespread. Multi-factor authentication involves providing more than just a username and password to prove your identity. It usually involves providing 2 of the following, in which case it's called two-factor authentication. First is something you know, for example, a username and password combination or a PIN. Next is something you have, for example, pressing a notification that appears on your phone using an authenticator app, or perhaps a badge that is scanned. The third is something you are. These are unique characteristics about you. For example, biometrics, such as a face scan, palm scan, fingerprint scan, retina scan, etc. Requiring multiple factors of authentication greatly increases the security. Even if an attacker learns the target's password, they won't be able to log in to the target's account. Another form of authentication involves the use of digital certificates, which are used to prove the identity of the holder of the certificate. They are mainly, but not exclusively, used for websites to verify that the website being accessed is legitimate. Entities that want a certificate For example, a company with a website send a CSR, Certificate Signing Request, to a CA, Certificate Authority, which will generate and sign the certificate. When you access a website, modern browsers display a symbol here to indicate that the website is secure and has a valid certificate. As you can see, my website has a valid certificate, and if you click on it, you will be able to inspect the certificate. This is how you can know that the website you're accessing is really jeremysitlab.com, not a fake website pretending to be jeremysitlab.com. I've been mentioning authentication a lot, and that's one part of an important framework you need to know for the CCNA. AAA stands for Authentication, Authorization, and Accounting. It's a framework for controlling and monitoring users of a computer system, such as a network. So what do each of those A's mean? Authentication is the process of verifying a user's identity. When a user logs in, ideally using multi-factor authentication, that's authentication. Then, authorization is the process of granting the user the appropriate access and permissions. So, granting the user access to some files and services, but restricting access to other files and services is authorization. Finally, accounting is the process of recording the user's activities on the system. For example, logging when a user makes a change to a file, or recording when a user logs in or logs out is accounting. Enterprises typically use a AAA server to provide AAA services. ICE, Identity Services Engine, is Cisco's AAA server, for example. These AAA servers typically support the following two AAA protocols. Radius, which is an open standard protocol and uses UDP ports 1812 and 1813. And TACX+, which is a Cisco proprietary protocol and uses TCP port 49. Just in case, I recommend remembering the names of these protocols and their ports, but for the CCNA, that's all you need to know about them. However, make sure you know the differences between authentication, authorization, and accounting. They are stated directly in the exam topics list. Okay, the final topic for today is security program elements. A security program is an enterprise's set of security policies and procedures. For the CCNA, there are a few elements you have to be aware of. First up, user awareness programs. These are designed to make employees aware of potential security threats and risks. Not all employees are cybersecurity experts. Someone working in the HR department is probably not aware of all of the cyber threats the company is facing. So, user awareness programs will help make those employees aware. For example, a company might send out false phishing emails to make employees click a link and sign in with their login credentials. Although the emails are harmless, employees who are tricked by the false emails will be informed that it is part of a user awareness program, and they should be more careful about phishing emails. So that's an example of a user awareness program. User training programs are more formal than user awareness programs. For example, dedicated training sessions, which educate users on the corporate security policies, how to create strong passwords, and how to avoid potential threats. These should happen when employees enter the company, and also at regular intervals during the year. Another essential element of a security program is physical access control, which protects equipment and data from potential attackers by only allowing authorized users into protected areas such as network closets or data center floors. This is not just to prevent people outside of the organization from gaining access to these areas. Even within the company, access to these areas should be limited to those who need access. Multi-factor locks can protect access to these restricted areas. For example, a door that requires users to swipe a badge and scan their fingerprint to enter. That's something you have, a badge, and something you are, your fingerprint. Badge systems are very flexible, and permissions granted to a badge can easily be changed. For example, permissions can easily be removed when an employee leaves the company, whether they return the badge or not. This allows for strict, centralized control of who is authorized to enter where. Okay, before moving on to the quiz, let's review what we covered. First, we covered some key security concepts, including the CIA Triad, as well as vulnerabilities, exploits, threats, and mitigation techniques. Then we looked at some common attacks, from common network attacks to social engineering attacks, which target people, not devices. Then passwords and multi-factor authentication, which includes a combination of something you know, something you have, and something you are. Then I introduced AAA. Authentication is the process of verifying a user's identity. Authorization is the process of controlling what that user is allowed to do in the system. And accounting is keeping track of what the user does. Finally, I introduced some elements of an enterprise's security programs, such as user awareness, user training, and physical access control. So that was a lot to cover. But if you learned the information in this video, you should be ready to answer questions about any of these exam topics. In the next few videos, we'll take a closer look at some network attacks and what we can do to stop them. Make sure to watch until the end of the quiz for a bonus practice question from Boson Software's ExSim for CCNA. Okay, let's go to question 1 of the quiz. Which part of the CIA Triad ensures that systems are running and accessible by users? Pause the video now to look at the options and select the best answer. Okay, the best answer is D, availability, which means that systems should be operational and accessible by users. A, confidentiality, means that data should only be accessible by authorized users. B, integrity, means that data should only be modified by authorized users. C, E, and F are aspects of AAA, not the CIA Triad. Okay, let's go to question 2. Which of the following terms refers to the real possibility that a potential weakness is taking advantage of to attack a system? Pause the video now to look at the options and select the best answer. Okay, the best answer is A, threat. A threat is the possibility that a vulnerability is exploited by an attacker. Mitigation techniques can be used to reduce that possibility. Okay, let's go to question 3. Your company implements door locks that require a badge to be scanned and a passcode to be entered. What is this an example of? Select the 2 best answers. Pause the video now to look at the options and select the 2 best answers. Okay, the best answers are C, physical access control, and D, multi-factor authentication. Physical access control allows only authorized users to access restricted areas. Multi-factor authentication uses a combination of things to verify a user's identity. In this case, something in the something you own category, the badge, and something in the something you know category, the passcode. Okay, let's go to question 4. Which of the following is not an example of multi-factor authentication? Pause the video now to look at the options and select the best answer. Okay, the best answer is C, doing a retina scan and then doing a fingerprint scan. Why is this not multi-factor authentication, even though you're doing 2 things? It's because the key of multi-factor authentication is that you use at least 2 different categories from something you know, have, and are. A retina scan and a fingerprint scan both fit in the something you are category, so this is not multi-factor authentication. Okay, let's go to question 5. Which of the following is considered accounting in the AAA model? Pause the video now to look at the options and select the best answer. Okay, the best answer is D, logging the date and time a user logged into the system. Accounting is all about keeping track of a user's actions. A and C are examples of authorization, and B is an example of authentication. Okay, that's all for the quiz. Now let's take a look at a bonus question in Boson Software's ExSim for CCNA. Okay, here's today's Boson ExSim practice question. Which of the following are most likely to be considered forms of authorization? Select 2 choices. Okay, so there are 5 choices, and you have to select 2. Pause the video now to check out the choices and select the best answers. Okay, let's check. So this question's about AAA: authentication, authorization, and accounting. So let's go through each of these. A, verifying a user's fingerprint pattern. So that is authentication. So you're verifying the identity of a person by checking their fingerprint pattern. So that is not authorization. B, verifying a user's password. So that is also verifying a user's identity by checking if they know their password. So that is not authorization, that is authentication. C, allowing a user to access a specific file. So in this case, you're controlling what a user is allowed to do in the system. So that is authorization. So I think C is one of the correct answers. D, logging a verified user's file access. So that is keeping track of what a user does in the system. That is not authorization, that is accounting. So I think D is not correct. And how about E, assigning a role to a verified user. So in a system, a role is basically a set of permissions. Like this role is able to write this kind of file, it's able to modify this kind of file, it's able to read this kind of file but not modify this kind of file, things like that. So that's a role. So if you're assigning a user to a specific role, that is controlling what they're allowed to do in the system, and that is authorization. So I'll click on Show Answer. It is correct, and here is Boson's explanation. So it talks about radius, which I mentioned, also TACAX plus. It defines authentication, authorization, and accounting, and gives some other details. Okay, so that was a quick look at Boson Software's ExSim for the CCNA. I highly recommend these practice exams, and if you want to get Boson ExSim, please follow the link in the video description. There are supplementary materials for this video. There is a flashcard deck to use with the software Anki. This time there won't be a packet tracer practice lab. Instead, I'll do a bonus demo of one of the attacks introduced in this video, the DHCP starvation attack, using a Linux distribution called Kali Linux. That will be in the next video. Before finishing today's video, I want to thank my JCNP level channel members. To join, please click the Join button under the video. Thank you to Kwa, Justin, Christopher, Sam, Anton, Tebogo, Samil, Anand, Pavel, Abraham, Sergey, Njoku, Victor, Roger, Raj, Kenneth, Seamus, Brandon, Marcel, Koni, Donald, Simode, Gustavo, Prakash, Nasir, Erlison, Marco, Daming, Ed, John, Funny Dart, Velvejakum, Mark, Yusuf, Boson Software, Devin, Jonathan, and Vance. Sorry if I pronounced your name incorrectly, but thank you so much for your support. This is the list of JCNP level members at the time of recording, by the way, May 3rd, 2021. If you signed up recently and your name isn't on here, don't worry, you'll be in future videos. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, like the video, leave a comment, and share the video with anyone else studying for the CCNA. If you want to leave a tip, check the links in the description. I'm also a Brave verified publisher and accept BAT or Basic Attention Token tips via the Brave browser. That's all for now.